You are listening to Claret Blue, an Aston Villa podcast brought to you by Birmingham Live.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Claret Blue podcast. We're joined by a special guest today, the man, the legend, he who walks on water, Mr. Brian Little. How are you, Brian?
I'm all right, Matt. Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, everything's okay. Like most people, being stuck in the house for a long time now, so looking forward to everything being lifted and getting out and about again, I guess. But yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good.
You're rocking a lockdown beard by the look of you. It makes you look very distinguished.
Yeah, me, I don't. I just little fads. I just keeps you going, something to do, isn't it? Really, I guess. But yeah, I don't know why, but it's there at the moment. I think I've shaved it off 3. It's about the 3rd one I've grown in the year, I think. So a couple of goatees in between as well. So it's been a little bit of a project for me on and off throughout the whole of the lockdown, really.
No, it suits you. What we're going to do, Brian, we're going to start by taking you on a very long wander down memory lane, back to when you were a 15-year-old boy in the northeast, and the prospect of joining Aston Villa first came about. I remember you telling this story previously about the kind of the journey that just when you kind of left Newcastle and ended up at Villa. Do you want to relive that for us?
I actually caught a train at Durham Station. My mum and my dad drove me to Durham Station in the Morris Minor 1000 little traveller with the wood on the back and everything, and dropped me off at the train station. Gave me £1.10 shilling and just said, right, we'll see you when we see you, sort of thing. It was a massive journey, and you jump on a train. In those days, there were little carriages with about 6 seats, and people used to come in smoking. And I remember feeling so sick on the journey, because I kept having to get up and walk out to try and get a bit of fresh air. But it was a real, in those days, basically that's how it was. I was sent down. My mum and dad were obviously pleased for me to go because I was going to embark on a possible football career. But I didn't know where I was going to. I didn't know really who I was meeting. I didn't know where I was going to stay. Hadn't got a clue about anything. So it was, for me, a massive step. Fortunately, I had a brilliant landlady and landlord, Mr. and Mrs. Mallard. Fortunately, I was in digs with a lad called Roy Stark, who ended up being the captain of the youth team, who basically looked after me the first year. I was, it certainly took me 3 to 6 months to settle in. But it was just, in these days, with academies and the way the kids are looked after and they know everything inside out, back to front, how things operate. Looking back at that journey, it's quite daunting, really, in the fact that I was away from home, no mobile phones, nothing like that, My mum and dad would ring me every Sunday afternoon at about 5 o'clock because they didn't have a phone at home at the time. I come from a mining background, pretty sort of average, great parents, of course, wonderful family, but we didn't have very much. So, it was great because, it took me a while to settle down, but once I found my feet, I was okay, sort of thing,
Is it fair to say that those youth team days were the making of you as a man as well as a footballer, because you had to kind of make sure that all your chores were done before you could even begin to earn the right to show what you could do on a football pitch? Yeah,
I mean, my first day's training, I remember thinking, what have I done? We went up Barbeacon, up King Standing, and ran with the senior players. Here I am, 15, I'm a kid, when I look back, I didn't know anything about anything outside of Peterlee, where I lived at the time. I didn't know anything about anything. Here I am thrown at an Aston Villa Football Club, with men, and I'm running around, and and I could run, but my word, it absolutely slaughtered me. And then when I finished that, we had to sweep the dressing rooms, tidy up, clean the toilets, clean the boots, do all sorts of things. And I think my first day, I left at 7:30 in the morning and got in about 7, 8 o'clock at night and just went to bed. I didn't eat. I was just absolutely done for, and that was pretty much the early that was like repetitive on a daily basis for a good month to 6 weeks before you started playing football. Pre-season was terrible. There was no structure to it. It was just hard work all the time, running. So it frightened me at first, but it made an impression on me. There were certain things that went on that I always thought, God, if I was older and doing this, I wouldn't do this to people. You got to, even then I had an opinion about things. I couldn't say very much in those days and never did, but it was just a very frightening experience. And I can, looking back now and how we look about things these days, you can understand, because it was a really tough thing to get into as a kid in those days. And I've seen a lot of lads over the years just, melt and think, I can't do this. This is not for me. Somehow I came through it. I don't know how or why. I guess I had a fairly strong mentality, but it was a really tough experience, apprenticeship. But at the same time, I had at least 15 great mates. We were split down the middle with sort of 7 or 8 Scottish lads, 7 or 8 English lads, and we had a great time together. And it was tough, but as I said, the fact that I came through it is fantastic, really, and I'm pleased I did, to be honest.
Did that create a real kind of camaraderie amongst you back then?
I still keep in touch with a lad called Bobby Glaze, for example, who lives around the Dudley area. He was an apprentice with me at 15. Never made it, Bobby, but we still, we meet at, we can't meet for the last nearly year now, but we'd meet at IKEA for a coffee on a midweek day. We've done that, we've been doing that for a while. Still speak to each other, still message each other. Obviously I speak to 1 or 2. My brother was part of it in those days as well, John Gidman and lads like that. But I've lost touch with quite a few, but I know where most of them are. This year I sent a message up to Scotland to a lad called Alex McMillan, who works at Rolls-Royce up there, and he's been there for years and years and years, and to wish him well on his retirement. So I keep getting messages which relate to the lads I met years ago. Mickey Kearney and our lad went to Reading. We were messaging each other last week. I keep in touch, and the fact is that I've been around Villa Park on and off the 50 years. I'm a bit of a focal point, and they often get in touch with me about people and about the lads. So that's really nice as well. I guess that's something that I enjoy, and it's good to have come through it, and it's good to think that we can still sort of talk to each other all these years on, even though our paths went in completely different directions.
We'll get on to what it was like to score in front of the Holt in a minute, but what was it like to sweep the Holt? To be honest with you, it was good fun, because it was a nightmare, but I can't tell you how much money we found on there. We used to find, in those days, 10 bob notes, and we used to find two shilling pieces, half a crowns, things like that. And there was a chip shop out the back of the Holt end. There used to be a line of houses and a little shop, a little fish shop in the end. So we'd sit on the Holt end at about 12 o'clock. Somebody had, whatever money we'd found, we'd pooled together, and one of the lads would run around and just bring as many chips and as many things that they could out of and we'd sit on the Holt end eating chips and things like that. So out of anything that was hard, there was a way of finding good camaraderie and having fun. And of course, at the same time, a gentleman by the name of Bert Bond, who was the groundsman at the time, used to tell us about, his exploits in World War II and things like that, which I don't know whether they were exaggerated or not, but they were good stories. He was a brilliant man, the groundsman. We all loved him to bits. So it was, it was hard, but it was good. And the worst thing about cleaning, not the terracing, but the dressing rooms were, if we didn't clean them properly, and if one person let the team down sort of thing, we had to clean everything again. And that brought, there used to be a few fights every now and again, but at the same time, it made us work for each other. It's not something that I would say is good for this modern era, that people are different, were brought up in different ways now. But in that period, that time, it was good for us. I still today, I've got 2 teenage boys. If I see a piece of paper on that bedroom floor, I walk in and pick it up. I can't help myself. And I keep saying to them, pick it up. Do it. If you don't, and I can't tell them to tidy, but
it's just embedded in me now to do things like that. You know, I can't walk past a piece of paper on the floor. If I go to the shops, I make sure I put my trolley back in nice and straight. I see people chucking the trolleys in, and I'm going, God, I was an apprentice, I'd have got slaughtered for that, you know. So it's just there, it's in the brain now. So it's good, you know. It was great for me. It was something that worked for me. I can see how it doesn't work for some people, though, you know. But it was tough, but I enjoyed it.
We mentioned the beard that you're wearing for lockdown, but I know from looking in your book that there's a great story about a haircut involving the number 7 Buzz. Yeah,
well, Frank Upton, who was brilliant for me when he came as the youth coach. Frank was a big, tough centre half who was, again, one of those real disciplinarians, but in a nice way. He was always nice to the lads, but he wouldn't let you off with anything. But he never treated anybody badly or anything like that. But Frank, I was starting to grow my hair, and he just got hold of me one day and, right, come on, you're coming with me. And I'm going, where? Just follow me for a bit. And took me out the ground, worked down Nelson Road, down to where Whitten Island is. And I'm saying, what's happening? He's saying, you're having your hair cut. And I'm going, I don't want my hair cut. I'm not having it cut. He went, you are? I said, I'm not. I don't want my hair cut. He said, you are. You've got to tidy yourself up a little bit. So anyway, we get about 40 yards away from the barber shop, which is on the island at Whitten, or was. And the bus had pulled in. And in those days, that opened back so you could, and a metal rod, so you could get hold of that and jump on. So I saw the bus there, and I thought, it's about to leave now. So I just suddenly took off, and I just took off and ran and jumped on the bus. And as I jumped on the bus, I held onto the silver pole and just rolled and waved at him, say, see you, Frank. And then I suddenly thought, I shouldn't be doing this, really, should I not? You know, it was one of them. It was just one of them daft things. So I went back to my digs, saw my landlady, Mrs. Mallard, and said, I think I might get the sack tomorrow, Mrs. Mallard. I've just ran away from the club. And she went, what are you doing? So I told her the story. And anyway, she said, well, look, knowing how football was in those days, pack your bags and take it with you. And if they send you home, well, you know, I'm going to miss you. But so anyway, I went in the next day, and I got told to see the manager. So I went upstairs to see the manager, and who was Vic Crow at the time. And I said, I'm sorry, but he said, no, it's not a problem, Brian. Here's your contract here, signed. And it was a professional contract. And I don't know for whatever reason, but Frank thought I might have to have my hair cut nice and tied for a picture if I was having my picture taken. But all he had to do was tell me, but he wouldn't tell me because he was told not to tell me. So it ended up being a bit of a silly thing, sort of, you know. And I ran away from the club, thought I was going to get the sack, but I ended up signing professional the next morning, which was quite funny, really, to say the least.
So I think you made your debut, I think, if I'm right in saying, it was in 71, October 71, against Blackburn. Is that right? Was that a substitute appearance?
Yeah, I came on for Davy Gibson. David was brilliant to me, and John Gidman. I came on as a sub against Blackburn, 1-4-1. I don't really remember too much about the game, in all fairness, or you know, whether I gave too much to the game or not. I can't really remember that much. It was just all of the days. But Davy Gibson, we always played like a lot of small-sided, like 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s. And whenever we played those games, David Gibson, who was one of the older pros, always picked me and John Gidman in his team. And you know, he used to talk to us all the time. And he was brilliant for me and Giddy. So, you know, the fact that I replaced him on the team, again, was nice. But because I know he would have been pleased. I knew he was pleased about it. To this day, if I see David, you know, he still talks to me about football, still talks about how games should be played, still talks about the modern players and what they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. He's such a football crackpot, really. Loves it, you know. But he took me under his wing, and Giddy. And I think people like him, Andy Lockhead, Bruce Rioch, Ray Graydon, Jeff Bowden, those type of players were always good to me, and were a big influence on me when I was young. But I played when I was 17 in the first team, and made my full debut later on when I was 18, later on in the season.
Can you remember your first of your 82 goals?
Yeah, the first one was Torquay on my debut. Yeah, it wasn't a great goal, but it was a goal, and I'd been involved with one or two of the other goals, helping out. Felt great, because before the game we marched around the stadium with the FA Youth Cup. We'd won the FA Youth Cup, and we'd beaten Liverpool in the FA Youth Cup final. As a third division football club, for the first time in its history, Villa in the third division. It was a tremendous achievement, and I remember scoring 2 goals in the final at Anfield, and their best player was Phil Thompson, who also went through and had a great career, didn't he, Phil? But we had a good team, a good group of lads who worked together as apprentices, who got on well together. The great thing was my brother was in the team with me. Roy Stark was the captain of the team. John Gidman was in the team. Bobby MacDonald was in the team. Jake Finlay, the goalkeeper. So many of us went on to have decent careers. Dougie George, who people might not know, but went off to Holland and played in Holland, at top-class football in Holland. Tony Betts went to America and played good football in America. So there was a good, probably 70% of that team ended up with good careers in football, which was a tremendous amount of players. Jimmy Brown, of course, who was, one of the youngest players ever to play in the first team, probably the youngest captain Aston Villa have ever had, I think, back in the 70s. So it was a good group, and I remember parading the cup, and of course the game was a great game for us. We Torquay 5-1, pretty much promoted at the time, so it was great.
Did you like the badge of being a professional footballer?
Yeah, but I was also very aware of the fact that I'd just finished an apprenticeship. My brother was still an apprentice. My best mates were apprentices. So I didn't really dash off home after training or anything like that. I often still worked. I often still helped my brother with his job, and often still did things like that. I just felt that was, the right thing to do. I just not just to walk away from it. Obviously, on a Friday in the next season, people like Bruce would say to me, "Brian, don't hang around waiting for people. Go home, get yourself rested up, make sure you're ready for the game tomorrow." So I had good advice of people, but I still was. Well, I think I'd like to think I was very grounded. I'd like to think, despite having long hair and looking a bit silly at times, and wearing 3-inch platform shoes when I went out at night, and people saying, "Oh, you're a lot bigger than I thought you were, Brian." I certainly wasn't, but I was just a bit of a, with my 32-inch hipster trousers on, bell bottoms. So there was the side to me which probably made me look something that I wasn't, But I think I was very, very grounded. I don't think I when I was very young, I was still very quiet. I mean, how I talk like I do today, I don't know. But in those days, they couldn't get 2 words out of me. I used to look and listen and learn. That was always my philosophy on how I was as a kid. Don't say much, Brian. Just look, just listen, and just learn. And that's how I was. And I built a lot of my early stuff on that. No, I don't think I got anywhere near carried away. I didn't start driving until I was 20-year-old and things like that. So I wasn't into a car things or anything like that. And when I bought my first car, my brother bought half of it for me, so it was half his as well, So we had to look after it. There are lots of things. No, I think basically when I started to believe, or not change, I think the year we got promoted back to the first division, I think that was when I started to really sort of come out of myself. And the season I had with Keith Leonard scoring a lot of goals, winning the League Cup, I think that's, and ultimately then being picked for the England team. So I think it was 2021 before I really sort of took on a different phase, but I was still a very quiet person when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, definitely.
What's that like then when you experience the kind of adulation from the Holt end? You're playing in front of a packed Holt end, and they're feeding off you, you're feeding off them. Obviously, we only see it from sitting in the stands. What's it like from the other side?
Well, I loved it. I always had done. The bigger the crowd, the better. The more things that I would try to do, the more times I'd flick the ball over my head or nutmeg somebody, or I did things then that, like I say, people like Ron Saunders used to pull. Well, he didn't have much hair, but he pulled it out if he'd had any with me. I just do things. I just wanted to try things. I just wanted to do things. I just wanted to, he used to tell me to blast the ball in the goal, but I used to just sort of ping it in the corner or bend it round. Or I just loved it, and I just loved the fact that I just loved the fact that I could do it at the time. And it was a tough game. Then I got kicked a lot. I used to get kicked a lot, and people who I played against used to say to me, "I'm going to have you today, son. Don't worry, I'm going to kick you." And I used to say, "Well, make sure you kick me in the box because I'll get a penalty then," and things like that. So I don't know. It was a different era completely, but I loved that. That was the time when the other side of me, that real show, if you can call it, if it's showy off, I don't know but I certainly liked to show what I could do on a football field, and sometimes it didn't come off, but I'd never stopped trying to do things. I don't think I did too many things that were easy, and it was the Saturday or the match day that I lived for all the time. So it was just for me, not listening to the crowd singing your name or anything like that. Just the whole atmosphere, just the whole. I've said it to people all my life. The football field's a stage, and when you're on that stage, act, show them what you've got, act it out. Be what you want to be. So for me, that was what it was all about. It was all about the stage. I'm going on the stage. I'm going to perform on the stage. I want to show people what I can do. And I don't care if I'm showing off, because afterwards I would walk and I wouldn't really say very much. I wasn't really a loud person at all. I was very opinionated. If I was asked, I would give an opinion. But I pretty much kept myself to myself, really.
Can you talk me through that iconic photo when you seem to be so high off the ground, probably even higher than you were in your platform shoes? When you're leaping through the air. Can you tell me the story behind that? When
I was a kid, I played a lot of basketball, and when you play basketball, when you're running up and you're bouncing and you're coming up to the net, you have a 1-2 and leap in the air. There was a way of getting your height, so it's like 1-2, and your third stride was this massive jump, and I think that was just one of those occasions where I've just caught it right on. It was right on my running line. So I've gone 1-2 and just let go. But the fact that I was up high was probably, because of that background that I had. But I could always jump. Again, I put that down to just timing. A lot of it is timing and looking at the ball and judging the thing perfectly. If you get that right, you can get to a certain height. And that on that day. And Terry Weir caught the picture absolutely perfectly. Probably the hardest part of it would have been just making sure you got the right contact on the ball, because, quite often you would jump that high but not get a good contact, or it would hit the back of your heel or whatever. But on that particular day, that particular picture, everything just fell into place. But I put the timing down to, like I said, playing a lot of basketball when I was a kid, and I was always good at jumping for the size of it that I was. So it just worked perfectly on that particular day. And I have the picture in my study here over there. I don't have many pictures on my study. I have the Youth Cup team over there. I have my goal at Bristol over there. I have the team at Barcelona there. I have the 96 Cup final winning picture there. And I have a Good News Awards picture here with when I won an award with Alex Ferguson and Stuart Pearce, Gary Lineker. So they're very iconic to me. But yeah, it's just it was just one of those things. But as I can look up now and see the picture, and yeah, I probably make it look as if I was. It looks as if I was high, because at the end I just lifted my right foot over just to flick the ball over the keeper's head, sort of thing. But it was a good goal, and one which has gets a story every time. every time it's its annual anniversary, I guess.
We've spoken to Andy Gray on this podcast, and he spoke glowingly about you, almost kind of crediting half the goals or even more that he scored for Villa during that purple patch down to this kind of sixth sense that you seem to have between each other. Is that reciprocated, your love and respect for Andy?
Yeah. Andy was just so different to us all, and certainly different to me. If I scored, you were lucky to get a little wave of the hand sort of thing, Andy scored. And I'd love to see Andy Gray playing football today, because I'd love to think what his celebrations would be like. They would, he'd have gone on to a different level, because, we couldn't believe, we think, what's he doing running around like that? Because you just didn't really celebrate like that. And those days, you used to pat each other on the back and get back to the halfway line and start again, because you just didn't do big celebrate. But I think Andy was the creator of the thing. Really, he just loved it. He's just a dream to play with. He's just brave. To simplify it, and it probably is simplifying it, but I could just look where Andy Gray was, look where the goal was. And if you put the ball somewhere in front of there, in between him and the goal, he 90% of the time he would get on the end of it, So that's probably making it sound easier than it actually was, but he was just brilliant. I mean, he's infectious. He's a motivator in the dressing room. He didn't like losing. He'd give anyone a rollicking out on the pitch if he had to. He loved it. He loved the tough games, and despite not being I remember signing Andy, and I remember having played with Andy Lockhead, having played with Keith Leonard. Ron Saunders said we bought a new centre forward, and good. And so I'm thinking, we'll see this big 6'5" centre forward come in now, because he's bound to be big. And Andy comes in, and he was a 6 footer, but just. And I'm thinking, my word, he's not as big as I thought he would be. And I remember one of my first games with him, I think it might have been Middlesbrough away. They had a centre-half called Stuart Boehm, who was 6'5". And I got out wide, and I actually floated this ball in the box. And I thought, oh, no, as I've kicked it, I thought, oh, no, Andy, you'll not beat him. And all of a sudden, I've seen Andy Gray over the top. He was over the head. His whole body was over the top. You talk about me jumping. And Andy was fully on top of Stuart Boehm and heading the ball. And I went, oh, that's our big centre forward. I remember thinking, oh, wow. He was just immense. He just, I think because he was a centre forward, and because in those days, basically your motivator was supposed to be a centre half, so your midfielder who was a captain. But he led the line and led the team, and wouldn't let anybody off with anything. He was brilliant to be around. Good fun. Loud and leery at times, but brilliant. I loved him to bits, and I don't see him a lot of them these days. We occasionally. I had a little chat to him about a month back. He rang me, needed to. I think he messaged me. I can't remember, but we had a little chat. Whether it's one of these, I can't remember. It might have been a text message, but we messaged each other a little bit about a month ago, talking about one or two things that we needed to. That he wanted to sort out, but he's done great for himself. He's a great lad, and we had a wonderful partnership. And you had John D into that mix as well, who was probably very underestimated. I think the one season we scored something like 77 goals between the three of us or something, which was quite extraordinary, really.
When do you think, if you had to kind of pin it down to one season or a couple of seasons when you were absolutely in your pomp and playing with a swagger, would it have been around the time of the hat-trick in the semi-final and the winners of the final of the League Cup? Would it have been around then, or? Well,
yeah, I think the 75 season we were promoted, and the 77 season with Andy and Dixie, I had an injury in between, which would be 75, 76. I had my first cartilage operation. And I was in plaster for 6 weeks. I mean, nowadays, you go in and come out, and within 2 weeks you're jumping around again. But I went in for a cartilage operation 76-ish. And I was in plaster for 6 weeks. I think found quite a bit of ligament damage, which I think they were worried about. But either side of that injury, the year we got promotion to the first division, and the year we won the League Cup. Yeah, the 2 League Cup years, I think I was pretty much at my best then. I think, without a doubt. 77 was great because, I think from Dennis had come in by then, who was an unbelievable player. Frank Carradis, the Des Bremners, and when I look at the Ron Saunders teams, the way they were built, it was a massive influence on me when I became a manager. But I think from a personal point of view, I scored those 2 years. I scored a lot of goals as well. So I always thought of myself more as an assist. I mean, I don't think anyone even thought of assists back in those days. They didn't even think, he put that in. Perhaps Andy did in his conversation with you, because I obviously did help him have a final pass to him. But yeah, the 2 seasons we won the League Cup, I think I was probably pretty much at my best in those 2 particular seasons. I just had quite a few injuries. I had, lots of groin injuries, stomach injuries, back problems, which eventually I found out later on in life I had major surgery on my back when I was 40. In fact, when they tried to sell me, that's what I failed my medical on, the fact that I had a potentially very, very bad back problem. In fact, if I hadn't finished with my knee in 79, I think my back would have cracked up pretty soon after that, to be honest, if I'd played professional football for any longer. I had to have my spine fused and discs removed, and that's pretty much what they found when I was almost transferred to Birmingham. That's what they discovered. So I don't think my career would have went on very much longer, even if I hadn't damaged my knee, to be honest. So, but I had, some great years. But the 2 outstanding years were 75 and 77, I think.
Let's just talk for a moment about that move that never went through across the second city divide then. And I think probably at the time you were disappointed, but I think Villa fans would probably be relieved in terms of your legacy at Villa.
I understand that, but I always answer the questions by saying to there's a high percentage of our European Cup winning team went on and played for Birmingham City. That was just the thing in those days. You didn't want to move very far. You wanted to stay in the area. You go back 40 years, and most players played in an area where they played for nearly every club all the time. My gripe was with Mr. Saunders. Ron and I didn't get on very well. I respected him to the end of the world. I've said that on so many times. When I became a manager, I tried to build teams like he built teams. We just had a clash of personality, and so basically, it was more around that, and we didn't get on. I didn't dislike him. I can't say that. We just couldn't eye to eye. We just used to argue a lot, and. That's just the way I was. I suppose I was a bit grumpy and awkward. I guess I was. But I just didn't agree with some of the things that he said to other people, or some of the things that he did. And unfortunately, I was at a period in my life there where I probably said more than I should have done. But it's just life, wasn't it, really? Just one of those things. So I had to move on from there.
I watched an interview last night, Brian, in readiness to speak to you today, about when that move to Blues fell through. And you seem very measured. I mean, I know you're a measured guy anyway, but considering that it was a disappointing setback, you seem very measured and matter of fact. And
Sorry, I saw someone posted it somewhere, and I remember it, and I could hardly remember doing the interview, to be honest. But when I listened to it, I thought, oh, blooming heck, So I deep down, I didn't want to leave. But Ron and I knew that it was time to do something different. But at the same time, I don't know whether, the other side of that story would be that, Peter Withers always said to me, Ron told me he wanted to sign me to play up front with you. So Ron thought he was, in his own way, I guess he thought he was getting the best out of me, being a bit awkward with me. But he was, as I've spoke to Gary Shaw and Tony and other players of a similar ilk, and they found Ron exactly the same. We found him, anybody who was a little bit different found it very hard to get on with him. But that was just his way. It's amazing when you get older what you look back on and say, crikey, why didn't I know that at that time? Why didn't I understand that? But as a 25, 26-year-old footballer, you're still a kid because you live in these little bubbles. You're not living in the real world. It's a different thing. You're looked upon as something different. You're playing in front of thousands and thousands of people, or you're performing in front of you. You're like an artist of some description. It's a different way of life. And I don't think we realised. I certainly didn't realise. The way Ron treated me, he treated me the way he thought he was going to get the best out of me. And I realise that now. But at the time, I used to think, why is he saying that to me? Why is he talking to me like that? Why does he not trust me to do this? But Gary and Tony and players similar to myself all had exactly the same. That was his way of treating people. That was his way of getting the best out of them. So, the move itself was born out of frustration. I mean, I remember the number of times he used to tell me, "Oh, I'm playing so-and-so this weekend. He's better than you." And I used to say, "What?" He said, "Well, you're injured, but you're not getting back in the team anyway, because he's better." And I used to say, but that was just his way of getting me ready to wind me up so as I'd play well the next game. But I used to get angry with it. I used to say, "Why is he talking to me like that? I don't need to be talked to." But that was his way. So whether God rest his soul, whether he really liked me or not, I'll never find out, will I not? But it was just. I think it was. If I have to blame somebody, I would blame myself more than him. If I'm being honest, that's the first time I've ever said that. Because as a kid, I didn't quite understand how a man or at that time motivated people in different ways. He never spoke to Dennis Mortimer like that. He never spoke to Kent McNaught like that or Alan Evans like that. But he didn't have to. He didn't have to. But he felt with me, Gary Shaw, Tony Morley, anybody with a little bit of an edge to them, right, I've got to wind him up. And sadly, I didn't realise that at the time.
Of the goals that you scored at Villa, and I've looked through some of the highlights reels, and you've scored a screamer against Man United, and I think there's an overhead kick in there somewhere. I forget who it was against. Is the one in your mind that you think, I love, if you could dig that out on YouTube, or I love that goal, that one that you play over in your own mind in idle moments from time to time?
The League Cup, yeah, and it's a simple goal, but I used to just like sliding things in the corner. But I remember against Manchester City, Chris Nicholl winning the ball in the corner. He rolled it into me in the box. I've sort of backheeled it round the back of me, turned the defender and just side-footed it in the corner. I like that because that was typical of what I used to do a lot. Most of my goals were side-footers. I remember Kenny Burns falling over the ball once in a Birmingham Villa game at Villa Park. And again, I remember just sliding it into the goal. I remember the Man United one, but I think that's probably the only goal I ever scored from outside the box, to be honest. I used to just I was good in the air, so I scored quite a few good headers. There was a lot of headed goals that I would be proud of, but I've never seen them. I've never been able to retrace them. Where I would say I think I jumped, for my height, I think I jumped over the top of people and scored. But the Man City one in the League Cup at Villa Park, the year we would have gone on to win the League Cup that year. That's probably one of my favourites because it was something that I'd practiced in the training ground. The ball would come into me. I'd let it come through my legs, but take it with my good leg behind me, spin round and just side foot it in. So that technically for me was like the sort of goal I'd like to score as many times as I could, to be honest. So that was one of my favourites. But it was technically good, but simple. I mean, you've been talking about the one at Bristol City, but that was a good goal. But I just the Man City one sticks in my mind, always has done for years and years.
So that one's kind of pretty much stamped with the Brian Little hallmark, quality assurance.
Yeah, pretty much. I hope. Yeah, I think so. Maybe. Yeah.
What was the realisation like, Brian, when the doctors said, "Listen, you could carry on playing, but if you do, you're not going to be able to have any kind of way of life, going into the future"? What was that moment like when it dawned on you that you had to retire?
Well, I don't think they said I could continue. I mean, I knew I couldn't. I knew I could. The thing is with it, even I was still back in training, and I would train odd days, and then I'd have to miss a couple. Or there was odd games that I played in, and people used to say, "Oh, you're back, Brian. Oh, look at you. You can still do this. You can do that." And I had a simple answer to their question all the time, and to their statements all the time, and I still use that to this day. And I used to say to people, "You can't feel my pain. You can't feel. You don't see me on the night time after I've trained, or the night time I've had a game. You can't see me at night with ice all on my knee, with having to take tablets because I'm in that much pain. You can't feel that. Yes, and 3 days later I'm better, but you can't. You've no idea what I'm putting myself through now." And it was hell. It was so hard, and it was here. It was really getting at me. And in those days, I remember when I went to Harley Street, they sent me down to a specialist in Harley Street who said, "Oh, yes, Mr. Little, we've never done this operation before, but I'm willing to experiment on your knee if you want me to." And I went, "What? You're going to experiment on my knee? Why?" He said, well, what we've thought of doing is taking some sinews off an animal and putting them into your leg." And I'm going, "What?" And I thought, I can't be doing with this. There's just no way. I wanted to be what I wanted to be, and if I couldn't be who I was or what I wanted to be, I'd rather have not been anything, sort of thing. But the thought of somebody experimenting on my knee, no, I remember thinking I can't go. And when I trained and played, it was the 4 days in between, and the pain that I was in, and the discomfort, and the fact that I couldn't walk around the house, and even at the time, trying to walk my dog, I was just in agony and just completely in bits. And people didn't see that other side of it, So the day I went back to Harley Street with Mike Pedgick, again, Pedge was asked to advised to retire the same day as me. I think it was a relief, really, for somebody just to genuinely say, "Look, Mr. Little, this is how your leg is, and it's not getting better. I promise you it'll get worse." And I remember him saying, on my advice, if I were you, to have a reasonable way of walking around and not being in the agony, you must stop playing professional sport. So, and I was relieved when he said that. I was relieved when someone told me, actually looked and said to me, instead of saying, "Oh, I'll experiment on you, I'll just cut a few bits out here, there, and everywhere and see where we get to." No, I was, again, I was more relieved than anything else, and I think I took it fairly well, and I've always accepted it as being what it was. And as I've said, nobody else could see or feel my pain. And I was being honest with myself, and I could look at Mark Walters, who was coming through, and I used to think, "Crikey, I wish I could do what he does. My word, look at what a good player he was." Sure, he was around at the time. I mean, and I was just in complete pain day in and day out. And if I took a week off, then I could probably play. But then the next week it would be worse again. So no, it wasn't a problem for me, Matt. I've never. I mean, I can be disappointed, yes, but I've never felt any animosity or anything towards anybody or anything at all. So it's just one of those things, and I feel I accepted it as best as anybody could.
You've got the news that you've had to kind of hang up your boots in terms of playing. Am I right in thinking that your first venture into the world of coaching and management was with the Villa Youth setup?
What I did, I worked in the club shop for a while. I wanted to work. I worked for a printing company for 3 months part time to try and learn what the rights and wrongs of printing world. In fact, it was the company I used to do the Aston Villa program, but I hated that. So I came back, knocked on the door at the club shop, and said, "Is there anything I can do to help?" And they said, "Well, you can work in the shop on a match day. People are like that." So I used to work in the shop on a match day. I used to sell lottery tickets. I used to go around to the pubs and the off licenses and swap over the lottery tickets, take their money, take it back to the club. And then one day, Keith Leonard and Ron Saunders went to Birmingham. Tony Barton was offered the job, and Tony said to me, "Brian, would you just look after the youth team for a few days for me?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I will. I'd love to do that." So he said, "If it goes all right, I tell you, we'll do it for a few weeks. If it goes all right, we'll talk about it." Well, I was there for 3 and a bit years as the youth coach, so just to being in the right place at the right time, I guess. And basically, that's probably what I wanted. You know, I mean, I when I went out to football for that 3 months in the printing world, oh no, I'm sorry, I don't. It just was not me at all. I couldn't be bothered with that. I quite enjoyed driving. I had a little mini Metro with Aston Villa written all over it. And I used to drive around the pubs and the clubs. But I was talking football to people, so it was okay, you know. But the youth team job was great, you know. And I had people like the older players like Ray Walker, Paul Kerr, Dean Glover. Then I had people like Mark Burke, David Norton, Darren Bradley, Tony DeRigo, Tony Daly. I had a good group of lads who I got on great with. And I found like what I felt I was reasonably good at was the man management side, you know, just trying to pass on all the things that I'd learned over the years. The way Davy Gibson and people like that and Bruce Rioch and them would speak to me, I tried to. So I was more, I thought of myself more as a mentor than a coach than anything else to start with. You know, we used to do all the, I hadn't done my qualifications, which weren't necessarily at the time, but I'd done my prelim badge. But I found like it was the mentoring side and talking to the boys side and just explaining what the game was about side that I was very good at. So, you know, being the youth coach was great. And I had some really good lads, some super lads, you know, and we had a great time together. Travelled off to youth tournaments abroad. And it was great to see, you know, the likes of David Norton and Darren Bradley and that getting into the first team, and DeRigo and Tony Daly, who I obviously still see a lot now and still keep in touch with quite a few of them. So, you know, that's nice, really. So, but I enjoyed that. I found that I was like I said, I wouldn't say I was the greatest coach in the world, but I could stop and say to people, and I could point out things to people that I thought were good for them. So I was off on the coaching role and eventually took my full badge and was ready for a bigger thing later on in life.
So let's fast forward quite a leap. You kind of earn your spurs in various management jobs, and then Villa and Doug come knocking when you're at Leicester City. And I mean, I'm talking a while ago now, but back in kind of tabloid terms, that would have been the talk of the Daily Mirror and the Sun and stuff.
Yes.
The kind of the fallout. I know a lot of it can be pantomime, but the fallout from you moving from Leicester to Villa was quite tense and hostile, wasn't it?
It wasn't half, yeah. I remember a friend of mine the day I'd moved. I remember a friend of mine rang me at 7:15 in the morning, 6:30. It was really early, and went, "Sorry to trouble you. Have you seen the Sun newspaper?" I said, well, 7:15 in the morning. I haven't seen the Sun newspaper. He said, "Well, go and get it." So jumped up, went off, got it, and the front page was Judas. So that was it, and it was me. Front page of the paper. That's terrible. Hated it. That was really, in all honesty, I'd been in football bar for how many years then? God, I don't know how many years I'd been in football. So I would have been 41, wouldn't I? So you know, there's what's that from 15? That's it's a good 26 years, isn't it? And it was basically the first time in my life I'd had stick. You know, I mean, I got stick off other crowds. People used to shout, "Whoa, get your hair cut," and things like that, you know, and all sorts of things. But I'd never really, you know, because my managerial thing there, you know, I'd won 2 championships with Darlington. I took Leicester to 3 playoff finals. I'd never had a bad day in my life, really, in fairness. Then all of a sudden I go to Villa where I'm thinking, oh, heaven, you know, here I am, look at this. And I get absolutely pummeled. And of course, my first game away from Villa Park was back at Leicester City. So, no, it was awful. But, you know, I look back and I know situations like that have been a massive help to football managers today because, you know, managers now have, you know, contracts which have clauses in with which write compensation for this, compensation for that. I remember not long after that, you know, in other managerial jobs when I got the sack at Hull, and basically was told if I didn't accept what he was giving me, I was getting nothing, sort of thing. You know, you look back and you think, wow, you know, it was so open. But the bottom line was that both clubs had agreed that I could go, and there was a threat of a court thing which never came. It's just strange, but I remember the day it sorted itself out. I remember the day that it was all sorted and sorted, and was the day we lost to Crystal Palace in the FA Cup. We lost 4-1 at Palace. I think it was about my third or fourth game. Gareth Southgate scored 2 against us, and I remember thinking I'm going to sign him. I remember after the game thinking I'm going to sign that lad, and I remember going in the dressing room, and everything had come out of my system by then. I was relieved that there was no court case going on, and I remember just looking at the players. We'd beaten 4-1, and I remember then saying, right, you're now my team. Time for me to. You're going to play the way I want you to play now. I'd played with the same team that had been left, that Ron had left, that had been left, and that had won at Tottenham, playing with a back 4. And I went, right, you know, we'd lost 4-1 and lost badly. And of course, that's when I introduced the 3 centre backs, the 2 wing backs, the 3 midfield players, and 2 strikers, and thought I was capable of putting my stamp on a Villa thing then. And I remember that was the day that the realisation of, right, I'm in charge now, just being battered out the FA Cup, seeing somebody I want to sign, and I was, you know, free from any sort of hassle anymore. So it was time to try and put my stamp on the club, really.
So talk to us briefly, Brian, about how you kind of manage the relationship with Mr. Ellis.
I've always liked him. I don't know why. He's a nightmare, or was a nightmare. God bless him. I mean, everybody in the world would tell you that. You know, he was unbelievable. I mean, every day when I was just about to go home, he would turn up for work. You know, when you think in those days, I used to be at the training ground, and you know, part of my remit was to be back at the ground at 1 o'clock some days because the chairman might want to see you. So I'd often have to dash down to Villa Park from Bodymore, sit there till 5 o'clock, and then think, right, I'm going home. Just as I'm going out the door, who would turn up? Doug. Yes. Oh, good evening, Brian. Just in time. Let's have a meeting for a couple of hours. And I'm going, oh, you know. So 3 years of that is painful. Let me tell you, it was honestly, he was. But I loved him to bit. I actually liked him, but in the end, he just wore you down. You know, he was unbelievable. But what I liked about Doug was I used to knock on his door and say, look, I want to sign this player. And he'd look at me and go, Brian, no chance. Sorry, mate, can't do that. Or I'd knock on his door and say, I want to sign this player. And you could see his little face light up. And you go, oh, yes. Oh, where do we go from now? And whatever, when he had that little bit of glint in his eye that he was going to do something, you knew you'd got a chance, you know? And I'd still be sitting in his office. We would be sitting in his office at 11 o'clock at night with a footballer and his agent. And you're just waiting for them to give in. You know, you're just thinking, I'm sitting there thinking after a while, thinking he'll submit in a minute, he'll give in to Doug because he's going to sign. He's just going to give it up. He's going to get what he wants. And he wouldn't let people go until he got what he wanted. He was unbelievable. And I know, add to that, the stories, and his stories, after 3 years, you've heard them day in, day out, night in, night out. And like you're falling asleep because you've heard the one where he's invented the overhead kick. You've heard the one where he's had this big fish on his wall. I caught that in Martinique and all this. So, you've heard all the stories, and but I loved him to bits. I did. He just tired me, just tires you out. I remember saying to Grego, I said, I'll give you 3 years, JG. I'll give you 3 years, son. And if you look in that era with Ron, with Graham, with myself, if you got to 3 years, it was you who wanted to go, not him wanting to try and get rid of you. If you didn't last a year, it was because he didn't want you there. But if you got 3 years, you were thinking, help, get me out of here, please. Honestly, I've got nothing again. He used to say to me, Brian, you're a very good driver. I said, what about a football manager, Doug? Oh, yes, you're quite good at that. But I love when you drive me really well. And he used to love me taking him to games because he used to say to me, God, what a good driver you are, Brian. I said, it'd be nice if you said something else nice to me apart from calling me a good driver, No, I had some great times with him. Best of all would be going to see Savo, jumping on an aeroplane, coming in. I went into him I'd watch in those days, when I look at the technology they have today, we had a video sent of Sabo, must have been sent to a few clubs. And I thought straight away, hallelujah, that's it. That's my Peter With, Gary Shaw. That's my Brian Little, Andy Gray, right foot, left foot, right foot, left. It's my Dwight York, Savo Milosevic. That was my Ron Saunders team. The minute I saw him, I thought, that is the partnership I want. And I've gone in and I've said, and I don't read newspapers, forgive me, and all that sort of thing. But I'm not. And I just went in and said, here, I want to go and sign this lad in Belgrade. Oh, and his face literally went, oh, good, I'll sort the flights out. And then we get on the aeroplane, he said, and then he just looked at me and went, Brian, you're taking me into what is a bit of a war zone at the moment. I went, what? He said, yes, there's all sorts of trouble going on in Yugoslavia at the moment. I went, oh, crikey. I had no idea, here's me, just football, but it was, it was great. And he just, because I'd got him, I'd hooked him, and we never left Belgrade. We had, he stood there in front of everybody, stubborn as could be. They were asking for unbelievable amounts of money. And, he didn't give it. He gave exactly what he wanted. He gave exactly for Savo to fall in line with us, with a promise that if he did better, then, he might move on to better things, or he might get what we were moving into an era where you were beginning to pay players more. But we had the perfect stage for Milosevic. And I thought he was brilliant, But at the same time, he could come to me some days. Some agent had been on the phone to him, and he wanted to meet them. And I'm going, no, I don't want to meet them. And he used to say to me, well, if you don't come, I'll sack you. It's just simple as that. So I say, all right, I'll be there. I'll see you later. Then, okay, no problems. Okay. He did. Honestly, just, well, if you're not there, I'll sack you. Oh, all right. It's in your contract, when I call you, you've got to be there, sort of thing. And when, sadly, later on, when I went back the five years or so ago now, and he was getting really old, I used, when he came into the director's room and I was in there most of the time, I used to see a little smile come on his face. So I knew he was seeing somebody that he liked to see, and that pleased me a lot, And I still to this day can see him, and I still think of him in his best. I think I had, him while he was at his best, sort of thing, and Ron and John, I think, and Graham. I think that era was Doug at his best, and his best was his worst. But that's the truth, But I loved him. I can't. And as I've said at the end, he was an old man and not well, but he used to smile when he saw me, and that made me feel $1 million, really, because I worked hard for him, but I got tired in the end.
So how soon, Brian, into you've talked about the Crystal Palace defeat, spotting Southgate, getting all the Leicester nonsense out the way. how soon between that kind of moment did you feel you'd really stamped your mark? Because you inherited a good team from Ron, but a team that was probably creaking and needed an overhaul.
They were good players. It was just time for them to move on. There was that period in anyone's career where there's time to move on. I remember getting to the end of January and think, right, I've got him, because I got manager of the month in January. We climbed up to 10. I think we were 10th off top. We'd gone from 16th, 17th in the league up to 10th off top and clear as a bird. And then when I signed Tommy and Gary, again, you've got to remember the transfer window was open all the time at that until the third Thursday in March. So the fact that I was the one in who had to talk to agents and talk to talk to Doug and talk to people about what we want to do and where we want to go and how you want to sign people. It wasn't like the director of football going around doing business for you. It was me, So I was in conversation with lots of agents, and agents were in conversation with me, and players were knocking on their agent's door saying, find out what the manager's doing, because I think he's trying to sign so-and-so, and if you do that, I want to leave. So we had this unbelievable period around end of January, February, where players would know, because their agents were in touch with other clubs about, if Brian Little wants him to move, would you be ready for him? And it was so disruptive. And that's how it was in those days. It was really disruptive. It helped in some ways, but it also had its disruption as well, because I had a real bunch of players with good experience, with a big background, with a no, I wouldn't say a big ego, but who knew how good they were and how they could do. And if they thought I was going to try and sign a younger player than them to take their place, they wanted to get out now, like yesterday. And they could, because the transfer window was open all the time. So I went into a period there where some of it through my own doing, but some of it through their agent and the player themselves finding out what was going on, where you had this massive disruption. And players were talking about what they're going to do at the end of the season, or before the third Thursday in March. And it was unbelievably disruptive to me and the team. So we had a period where I could just look at the team and think, hang on, we haven't done bad today, but we've ended up losing again. Why? And it was that little 5% or that little 10% that made them the players they were that was missing. So it was a difficult period. That was a difficult period, but it helped me change things as time went by, and I knew exactly by the end of January where I was going. I just had to get to the end of the season, and I thought I was going to get to the end of the season with ease, but February was terrible. March wasn't so good either, and I think we needed a big win against Liverpool in April that actually gave us that little bit of breathing space to stay up at the end of the season. But it was difficult, and of course, through that period, players like Kevin Richardson, Ray Houghton, Earl Barrett, Dean Saunders, Dalian Atkinson left at the end of the season. They all knew where they were going. They all knew that, they all knew in February that, at the end of the season, I'm going to Galatasaray, or I'm going to Fenerbahce, or I'm going here, I'm going there. So it whilst it had its advantages in some ways over the modern system, it certainly has its disadvantages as well. So, but I felt at ease with my job. I felt at ease with where I was. I felt at ease with what I knew I was going to do. I really had to just stay in the Premier League, and that got a little bit tight towards the end. It got a little bit sort of hairy and nervous for us. But I was comfortable. I was very comfortable with what I was doing, but I wasn't always necessarily 100% in control of the results. That's what I needed to get right. As I said, I knew I wanted Gareth Southgate. I knew when we played them in the FA Cup, I knew that's what I wanted to sign. When I saw the Milosevic thing, I knew I wanted him. I knew I wanted Mark Draper. I knew that. So I pretty much knew what I wanted to do. And thankfully, I got the opportunity to do that.
So if the League Cup winning seasons in the 70s as a player were you in your pomp, Was the League Cup winning season for Villa 95-96 you in your managerial pomp? Certainly in Villa terms, was that the season?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we had a good team. We had a great. We were. It was on the verge of going further. I mean, sadly, we couldn't take it further, which is a big disappointment to me. But there was that certainly the starting 11. We didn't have a big squad. You know, we had Tommy Johnson and Stan Staunton was. I wouldn't say he was on the fringe, but he was too good a player to call a fringe player, Stan. But we had him, Alan Wright, Hugo. There was a little mix where Stan could play left back or even in the centre of the pitch for us as a central defender. And the balance of that team was the balance of a Ron Saunders team for me. I've said this to many people on many occasions. I probably said it to you, and if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But I based my team on if I look at the forwards, the right foot, left foot, Dwight York, Savo Milosevic was going to be my Peter With, Gary Shaw, my Brian Little, Andy Gray, my Mark Draper was, and you can say whether they were better or not. It's not an argument who was the best of them. It's just a comparison. Mark Draper was my Gordon Cowans. Andy Townsend was my Dennis Mortimer. Ian Taylor was my Des Bremner, unbelievable energy. My centre backs, Alan Evans and Ken McNaught, and I had McGrath, Southgate, and Hugo Egiog, who were every bit as I had a great goalkeeper. They had Jimmy Rimmer and Nigel. I had Bosnich. It was brilliant. My two fullbacks were just underestimated players, Kenny Swain and Gary Williams. Nobody really said much about them, but they were so functional and so organised and so good. And I had Gary Charles and Alan Wright, who, people would look at and go, Gary Charles. But I tell you what, they were so organised, and the whole group was for me. It was my tribute to Ron Saunders. That was me putting a Ron Saunders team together. And lots of people would say, some of my players might have been better than some of that team that won the league. I don't know. I don't want to get into that sort of argument. But I know deep down, I'd built that sort of a team. But I did the same at Leicester. My Leicester team my Darlington team was built, completely different level, but the same principles. One player who does this, one who does that, one who does this. It was a mix and a marriage of players who complemented each other to make a team functional and entertaining. Let's face it. I don't think we weren't entertaining. I think we were mega entertaining. So that's what I was really proud about more than anything else. The disappointment was, when we started to build on squads, I couldn't quite handle that, and I don't think I ever got to grips with that. But that team was one hell of a good team, and winning that League Cup was an unbelievable experience. One that I'm really proud of. So that's with me forever, thankfully.
So in terms of the transformation, you've been able to kind of phase out a lot of players who were good players, great players under Ron. You've brought in pretty much a new team, haven't you, in the space of 18 months, and you managed to get that new team to finish fourth that season, FA Cup semi-final, and win a piece of silverware. So that was my era. This is how long ago it was. I was 17, I think, that year. And so I am going to think of it a lot more fondly, than what's happening now or whatever. But it must even now fill you with immense pride that not only did you manage Villa, but you managed Villa into what for a generation is remembered for a really, really great time, a great era. Yeah,
it was brilliant. I mean, I inherited some great players from Ron. I left some great players for John. I mean, and that's how it should be, really. Everything was disciplined, everything was in place. So yeah, I mean, I chuffed to bits that I got the job after Ron. I was really happy at Leicester, and without John Gregory sort of kicking me up the backside, saying, "Brian, don't miss out. You can't miss this chance." If you might not ever get offered this opportunity again, and I know you like Leicester, and John was brilliant, and he could see it clearer than me at the time, and he would always say, you might not get the chance again, so don't miss out, and he was right, and likewise for him. I mean, He could have rang me and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. I don't really want to walk into your shoes. I know I was there with you and I've left, but no, it was right for him to take over. So his mindset was really good. But that era with Graham prior to that as well, Graham and Ron, myself, and John, and obviously Martin afterwards and things like that. There was some great things. So it was just, as I've said, you were talking to me about an hour and a half ago about a 15-year-old kid walking into the club. For me, that is even greater. That's the fact that I can remember the first day I walked into Villa Park as a 15-year-old kid. And that 15-year-old kid not only played for the club, not only worked in the club shop, not only was a youth coach, he became the manager. No, it's just incredible. It's just a wonderful experience. So, I'm proud, crikey. It's brilliant. It's a fairy tale story in my mind. Total fairy tale story, which is still going on today. So, I've been blessed.
Did you get a sense on that cup run that your name was on the cup, if you like? Did things open up in that way, or you don't get ahead of yourself like that?
No, I think the Arsenal game was the one. We just thought, you looked at that and you thought, oh my word, they're a good side. They were a good side. And they were obviously managed by Bruce Rioch, who I would put down as one of my major mentors in my life. A, as a young kid, Bruce was really good to me. B, and more especially so with that game leading up, Bruce gave me my best job in football prior to becoming a manager, which was to work with him at Middlesbrough. When he and Colin Todd took Middlesbrough from the 3rd division back up to the 1st division, I had 3 wonderful years with Bruce, where he taught me so much about how to manage, leading from the front, putting the hours in, putting the work in. In those days, we used to have to go to games every single night. We used to have to coach the kids in the afternoons. We would all join in with the first team through the days. Bruce was a wonderful, wonderful mentor of mine, and gave me the inspiration to become a football manager, really. So the semi-final was the game that I was looking at and thinking, wow, I've got to beat somebody who I actually look up to, like, in a big way. I think I've always felt on a football field as a football player, I've never frightened, not frightened is a word, but I never felt in awe of anybody, really. That's it, I'm playing. Give me the ball. As a football manager, I was now walking to an era where like my ex-boss, I was having to try and beat him, and he wasn't just my ex-boss. He was someone who I had total respect for, and thought he was a million miles better at it than I was in many respects. So the Arsenal game was, and when we were 2-0 down, and Yorkie got 2 goals back, didn't he, in the semi-final? I remember then thinking, oh, he's beaten me. I remember then having a thought, oh, he's probably beaten me now, hasn't he? And then Yorkie popped up with them goals, and thought to myself, right. And going into the second leg, I knew it would be hard, but I knew we were strong enough to not let them score. But it was important we didn't think about defending totally. But no, I think the Arsenal game, that didn't scare me, but it certainly had. I was concerned that they might just have a little edge on us, so we'd have to be at our best to get through. And thankfully we were. So outside of that, the other games, I think if you look at the teams we played, it was always our first team, wasn't it? Really, it was all the way through that run. We didn't worry too much about how many games people played in those days. But there still wasn't the international sort of get-togethers as they are now and stuff like that. There's players still just played less games than they do today. We had a good team, and I as the season went on, we got better and better, and we grew. I thought we were unlucky in the semi-final against Liverpool, to be honest. I know we lost 3-0, but I still think that was probably one of our best games at times. At times in that game, we were outstanding, really. But no, the cup run itself, got to Wembley and I thought we were there. Thought we could win it. Totally confident about it. The semi-final was the big test for us, I think.
Last night I listened to some of the commentary and some of the preamble ahead of the cup final. It's available on YouTube, and they go and they interview Howard Wilkinson, or they interview you, and again you're so kind of matter of fact, and it's kind of I think you actually described the build up to it as all being a lot of hassle. I think rather than the excitement that we expect, you just gone, listen, we're here now, we come to do a job, let's get all that nonsense out of the way. It was very, very focused.
Yeah, I think, my 3 years at Wembley with Leicester taught me that, when my last game I won with Leicester, the last time we won the promotion to the Premier League, we actually went down last thing at night, had some breakfast and played football. The previous 2 years, we went 3 days before and trained in different things and did this different and that different. And I just wanted it to be like, we went a couple of days before, of course, but everything else was low key. Everything else was just treating it the same as, making sure everybody was, aware of the importance of the game, but just to be really focused on it at all. It wasn't a celebration-y thing. It was there. We were there to do a job. We were there to win a game. And the 3 games with Leicester taught me that. The first 2, it was like a day out, here we are, we're at Wembley, and it doesn't matter what happens. It does. I'd lost twice at Wembley. God, it's a horrible place to lose at. And I was determined that wasn't going to happen again. So certainly with the Villa, when I got there was only one focus, one at all, and that was getting the team to be organised and teaching them that we're here to win a game of football, end of story, but to be relaxed and to be happy and to be comfortable. And I personally felt happy being in the hotel that I was in. I didn't want to stay right next to Wembley. I wanted to be away from it. I wanted the lads to have a little game of snooker and things like that if they wanted to. I wanted a relaxation thing. I wanted them to smile as they're walking around the place, not to be worried, so they couldn't see the ground from outside and things like that, and it all went to plan. So that was what it was all about.
Did it require a kind of Churchill-like speech? Did you tend to write team talks in advance, or did it all just flow naturally?
No, always. I wouldn't say off the cuff, because I think I'm fairly organised, but I would always. There was, I like I say, man management. I was quite good at saying to people, "Don't forget how he plays. I know you played this way last week, but this player's different, so treat him different." That was pretty much how I was as a player. I knew when I played against certain people, their strengths and their weaknesses. You got to go back in those days. You go back even to '96. Our rundown on Leeds United was 3 pieces of paper. 3 pieces of paper with about 6 to 20 words on any individual player, and a few diagrams on half a dozen of their free kicks or set pieces. Compared to today, how you can analyse everything, it was so basic, it was untrue. So basically what you said to people was massively important, and that's how it was in those days. It was my team selection, if I had a team selection problem, had to be spot on. It wasn't influenced by me sitting watching 20 games of Leeds United play against somebody. It wasn't influenced by the analysts saying to me, he does this, he does that, he does the other. It was purely what's in there, and that's how it was in those days. You had to back yourself. You had to back your own opinions. You didn't really not trust, that's the wrong. You didn't really have to you couldn't value other people's opinions too highly, because if it wasn't right, people can prove things by showing you things now today. An analyst could prove anything to you. Back in those days, somebody might have an opinion completely different to yours. Now, you had to back yourself all the time. So everything that was done in those days was not 100% down to me, because I had Alan and John with me, but there wasn't many of us. It was, our opinion on how we should play, what the team should be. Get out there and show them what you can do. End of story.
Were you surprised with how resounding a result and performance it became?
No, we were just ready for it. I could tell we were ready for it. And there was little rumours about, someone sent someone down from Leeds to watch what you're doing. And we used to laugh at it. We used to make a laugh and a joke about it. And we'd say, right, we'll see you in the snooker table later on. And we just, well, if they're watching us, we're just playing snooker all day. That's all we're going to do today. We just had it. But, that was our mentality in those days. We just, just got on with it. We were ready to play anybody, anywhere, at any time. And we were happy to do that. We were flying. It just, we were just really, really going along. It was on a crest of a wave, and we were as good as most of the other teams. We had a couple of injuries which made it a little bit more difficult. I remember Gary Charles getting injured at the end of the season, which really put a dampener on the season for us, and then that made the last few games very difficult for us because we were all worried about Gary at the time. He had a nasty injury. But we were happy. We were just happy in our own skins at that time.
When Savo spanks that one in to open the scoring, camera obviously pans to the dugout where you're sitting there, and this little kind of little beam of delight upon your face. Can you still picture that moment?
Yeah, of course I can. I've like you, I've seen it a few times, and yeah, you can. It was Milosevic got a lot of criticism, but how can when he left us, he went for 8-point-something million. When he went wherever he went from somewhere for 25 million euros a year after that. He scored nearly 40 goals in 115 games, something like that. It's not bad going. Him and his strike partner were outrageously good. I think Savo was a lovely fella. Brilliant lad. He was only a kid at the time, in all fairness to him. And Yorkie were magnificent. So it was great to see him score that game. He was. I'm not saying he was treated badly, because he wasn't. It's just a bit misunderstood, wasn't he? Really, in many respects, and it was difficult for him. And for someone to come into this country all those years ago, at a time when we didn't have the facilities that have today. He did great. He did fantastic for us. So I was really pleased for him more than anything else.
Steve Staunton and Tommy Johnson are the first ones when the final whistle blows to leap on the goal scorers and to get involved in the hugs and the celebrations. It's a team game and a squad game, but that must be great that even your subs who were disappointed at not getting onto the field bought into that moment as much as the ones who started. Yeah,
but we were a small squad in those days, and everybody played their part. Everybody had games. I mean, Tommy came in and out of lots of games. Stan came in and out of lots of games. So they were very much involved and very much part of it. The hardest thing was picking the team, because even though there's only two people and those two people are going to be on the bench, we were still in an era where everybody wanted to play every single game. People didn't accept having a rest and that in those days. Hence the team throughout the tournament, all the way through. There might be one change in the games. So they were very much, very, very involved with it, very close to it. I think if anybody was majorly disappointed out the three, it would have been Stan, Staunton. He wanted to play all the time, and that's not a fault of his. That's tribute to him. He was a blooming good player. I'm not surprised. We were very together, very much in it, and it's winning at Wembley, and for those who've witnessed it's just great. For those who haven't, they've missed something in that whole career. It's just an incredible feeling, really.
Did you celebrate together, or did you just let the lads get on with it and do their own thing?
No, the thing was we did have a get together, but basically some of the lads had to leave to go off to international duty. If I remember right, I'm sure I'm not wrong, but we had a do fixed up in London that night. But basically, quite a few of the lads went off on internationals. Gareth and them would have gone off, and they came back on Friday, and I think we played Liverpool either on the Saturday or the Sunday in the semi-final. So that was my first experience of losing a lot of players the week before a massively important game. And then that we never quite, I don't know, well, you could argue, did we get it right or not? I don't know. I'm not going to go down that road. But, we won a final, lost a good 60% of our team who turned up on Friday. And I can't remember whether the game was Saturday or Sunday. It certainly wasn't. We didn't have any preparation for the game at all against Liverpool in the semi-final. But that's what success brought you, didn't it? And really, it does even today. The games just get bigger. We didn't really. I can't say we didn't handle the next game very well. We were a bit unlucky. Gareth got injured, and then they scored. Probably should have come off the pitch, but didn't in the semi-final. So there was a celebration of sorts. I don't think we couldn't really just throw caution to the wind. I think a lot of the lads, I'm sure some of the lads left before midnight. Were away, had to leave that night, and we didn't get together until the Thursday or the Friday. It would have been before the Liverpool game, which was the semi-final of the FA Cup. But it was I've never really been wanting to celebrate and that much, me, really, to be honest. I'd probably have had a couple of drinks and got on with it, but it wasn't a night I remember overly well. I don't think I know I didn't. I know I wasn't jumping up and down and getting drunk and things like that. I know it wasn't. And I don't think I took too much notice of what anyone else did, to be honest. I think I probably then, knowing me as I was then, I'm a lot different now. I'm far more chilled now than I ever was. I think I would have been thinking about the Liverpool game then. I think I'd have been thinking about what do I do for that and wanting to win that. It never happened. We lost, but I wasn't celebrating as such.
Have you got any mementos of that? Have you got a medal or a team sheet or?
No, I've got a medal. I don't know what I did with everything else. I don't know. I haven't got very much at all. I have the medal, the Coca-Cola Cup medal. I've something. Again, now loads of people message me and ask me about. Oh, have you kept that? Have you got this? Have you got any shirts? Have you got the? Not a thing. I was never one for. So, I occasionally now try and get older things myself. I've given a lot of things to people who were friends of mine over the years. I remember giving my England shirt to a friend of mine. And he went, "What?" I said, "No, you have that, mate. You look after it." I never got any more, fool. I should have kept it, shouldn't I, really? But never, I know, and he knows that I know who he is, and he knows that I know who he is. So I've never forgotten, but I am perfectly happy with where it is. Perfectly happy.
You've told me this story before, Brian, but it makes me laugh, so I want you to tell it me again if you can. Just the Sasa Church reason for missing a game once.
Oh my God, Sasha. God love him. He was brilliant, wasn't he? Well, Sasha was brilliant. I mean, I remember when he turned up, his first training session, he jumped up and down, dribbled past a couple of people and stood there and went, "How much I pay for him?" And he stood there and went, £4 million. And I thought, oh no, don't do that. I remember looking at Tommy Johnson and Mark Draper and Tails and them who were the best of pals. And Sasha, it looked as if he was coming in to try and be a real threat to Tommy. So I remember thinking, oh God, they're going to have him. And I thought that's Sasha got off on the wrong foot straight away. Anyway, as the season progressed, we always had a few problems with him here and there. And then I remember Jim Walker, who was my number one go-to man for the players. If anything was wrong, if they felt ill or anything, ring Jim, he'll sort it out. So I get a call, I don't know, middle of the night, might have been midnight, might have been 2 a.m, I can't remember, but I've been well asleep, and it's Jim. So I've looked at my phone, oh, Jim, better take it. Hi, Jim, all right? Not really, Gaffer, no. I said, what's up, Jim? He said, it's Sasha. I said, he's all right, isn't he? He was all right this morning. Yeah, he's in London. I said, London? What's he doing in London? And Jim got these next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words out as quick as he could and put the phone down. And he's in London, he's having a nose job in the morning, and he can't play tomorrow. Boom, put the phone down. So he's gone to London. He's decided to have a new nose. and he wasn't available. And I found out after that he wasn't available for 8 weeks. He couldn't play for 8 weeks after he's had a nose job. And that was the sort of thing that Sasha did. He just, but Jim was that embarrassed. He just said the last bit that quick, slammed the phone down and thought, oh, thank God, because I'm not going to listen to what he's going to say to me after that. Because I could have said to him, get yourself down there and get him out of the hospital or whatever, you know. But he just, and then, you know, weeks later, when he was over all that, he went down and had his teeth done and couldn't play for 2 weeks after that sort of thing because he had new teeth. I mean, honestly, he was a nightmare. Again, what a talent, lovely lad. But again in those days, we managed to keep that fairly quiet, you know, which is unbelievable, really. And in today, you know, think about that today, it's got no chance, hasn't it? So, but Sasha was, I think he wanted to look good. You know, he'd become this professional player in the Premier League, playing for Aston Villa, and he decided he needed a nose job, but he did it in the middle of the season, disappeared, straight down to London, and that was it. The sort of things that players just give you nightmares over. I don't think it would happen today, in all fairness, but 25 years ago, good grief.
What was your best signing at Villa, pound for pound, in terms of what they delivered, what they did for the dressing room, what they did on the pitch, and not giving you too much of a headache to manage away from the pitch?
Gareth, without a doubt, Southgate. I think I love Draper. I mean, Mark's. I think the world of Mark as a person. You know, Wrighty and Charlo for what they cost us were brilliant. Tales for what he gave the club. Again, I loved them all, but Gareth, you know, listening to Doug, and I can't remember what the chairman of Crystal Palace was called at the time. But
Ron Rhodes, was it back then? Was it?
That's him. Yeah, it was like listening to two car salesmen on a trying to buy a Ford Capri off each other or something like that. You know, like, well, I'll give you well, if you give me this, I'll give you that sort of thing. And in the end, I can't remember. I think they came down to 2.25 million or something like that. But honestly, it was crazy listening to the pair of them. I'm listening to the phone call, but. Gareth was just the day I met him, the day he came in, the day I saw him play against us. He played in midfield, I know, but I knew he could play in different positions. Southgate, I have to say, and his progression was immense. You know, his progression from coming in as a potentially midfield player, stroke fullback, stroke centre half, to cement in that position alongside Paul McGrath and Hugo Egior. And I never had to tell Gareth. We had a principle of how to play, but I didn't have to tell Gareth anything. He sensed danger very naturally. He come out with the ball naturally. No, he was a super signing. Best without a doubt. Yeah, because he was just and a great, lovely person, brilliant man, very studious. And great in the dressing room. Would have a laugh in it. It was part of the laughs and jokes and everything, well and truly in with all the fun that went on. But at the same time, ultra professional. So Gareth would have to go to the top of the tree for that.
And the final thing, Brian, I was going to ask you, because you've sat here patiently and indulged us for however long, an hour and 45 minutes, blimey. Can you you've touched on it previously about kind of growing a little bit weary and a bit jaded from managing Aston Villa. Just talk us through the kind of your mindset then in the last kind of couple of months and how and why you left eventually.
I think things just got on top of me. You know, I look back at that, and when you think back in those days, I'd been managing for 10 years. I did more or less everything. You know, I mean, as a manager in those days, I think looking after the team probably was 20% of my role, 20% max. Dealing with the press, all on my own. Dealing with Doug, all on my own. Dealing with agents, all on my own. Dealing with the players for contracts, all on my own. Scouting for players with the help of my chief scout, but basically on my say-so, on my really going out and looking at them. I think the 10 years of that, and I just shattered. Just totally shattered, just tired. and I wasn't happy at home. My home life wasn't great at the time, so it was a massive, massive combination of 10 years, absolutely 100% to my job, and I couldn't see the simple thing. And that's what aggravated me more than anything else. Not doesn't aggravate me, but when John came, John made pretty much one change to the team. I think John leaving might have had a lot to do with it as well. I'd lost someone who was very important to me, but John came in and put little Henders in the team and went back to that more solid 4-5-3-2 that I used to play all the time. I'd had to adjust because I had Stan, Collymore, Dwight and Sabo, and I used to try and play them all the time. So there was something right under my nose that I'd lost little track of, and I think that was tiredness more than anything else. But that period from February till the end of the season, I think John's major change was just putting little Henders in the team, little Lee Hendry, who was a bloody good player in fairness to him. But he just wasn't ready. For me, I kept saying to Lee, he was a little bit of a lad when he. And I used to say, just behave yourself, and I'll put you in the team. And then when I put him in the team, he got sent off the first game. He only been on 20 minutes and he got sent off. You remind him of that. I mean, he did. He got sent off at Queen's Park Rangers, went on, got booked twice in 20 minutes. And I'm like, what are you doing?
We spoke to Lee about that because we've had Lee on as a guest in the last 6 months, and we spoke to him, and he says he trudged. He was at QPR, wasn't he? So he trudged down the track, gone into the tunnel, into the dressing room, and I think Ray Wilkins was the player manager at QPR, and he says Ray Wilkins just come and put his arm around his shoulder and said, that's football, you'll learn. And he said when you came in, you kind of gave him daggers, and he thought, oh God. What have I done here? So, but what he said since then, Brian, is that I think he plays golf with you occasionally, or your mates now. And he says he just can't believe the difference, Brian Little, the manager, to Brian Little, the non-manager.
I've changed. I'm totally sort of chilled out with my life now, totally. To be what I was as a manager, I had to be very focused and very serious about things. Because of how I am as a person, how I was as a player, I had to. It was almost as if I was. What was that fellow who stood in front of the mirror and changed and it was a different man every time he's changed his job, sort of thing. He got put different clothes on. I can't remember what it's called, Mr. Ben or something. Well, I can't remember. Anyway.
Mr. Ben.
I had to. When I was a football manager, basically, every day I put a collar and tie on. Every day I had my hair. Every day I had a shave. Every day and that's really not me, So it was hard, but I was focused and I was ready for it. And when that began to wane towards the end, that on top of the, 10 years of unbelievably hard, and it was hard work. I worked my socks off for 10 years, but now I'm back to being how I was before. I'm just me now. I do what I want when I want. And nobody can tell me to do anything else unless my wife walks in now. Then I'll get the kettle on, cook the dinner, wash up.
Can I just ask, how did you communicate this to Doug? What was that like when you said?
No, I didn't. I couldn't be bothered. No, that was it. That's it. I'm off. That's me. So I just walked in. I'm off. I'm finished. That's it. I'll bring the car back tomorrow. You can have it back. I just had enough. There's just a couple of things that I think actually the day I left, Gareth Barry was signing pro, so that was an important thing to finish off. But I remember driving down the ground, and that was it. There was a few things going on that were chewing me up, and I just thought, that's it. I've had enough now. And once I've made my mind up like that, that's it. I'm stubborn. Then I'm going to do it no matter what. I didn't explain anything to him. I mean, in fairness to Doug, he did say, look, just stay. I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to ring John. We'll fetch John back if that'll help you, things like that. He was brilliant. But I just said, no, look, I really need a breather now. And I actually thought I would have taken a year out of football. In fact, looking back, from a football point of view, I should have took a year out. From a personal point of view, it's the best thing I've ever done because, of other things in my life that have changed.
No, well, thank you so much for doing it all on your own terms, because, you know, I could be having seen you as a manager, and, you know, you've given us some of the best memories, part of that managerial dynasty, if you like, with, like, during the 90s of Ron Atkinson, yourself, John Gregory, you know, really, really exciting time. Big regret from me that I'm having to dig out little clips here and there on YouTube, because I've never got to see the brilliance of Brian Little in the flesh. But I'll leave you with this, Brian, and this is just stupid nonsense that anybody who listens to our podcast will probably recognise. But Brian Little walks on water. What are you actually like on water? Are you a good swimmer? Are you a good canoeist? Do you like going on ferries? Do you get seasick? How are you with water?
I can swim. I have been sick on a ferry once before, but that was because I'd had a few drinks and too much to eat. And we took off in. I remember the captain going, right, it's a bit choppy out there, but we're going to give it a go. And I was thinking, oh my God. And I was sick. But no, I'm all right. I'm okay. Generally pretty good. Water doesn't bother me, to be honest. I like walking in the rain. I loved playing football in the rain when I was a kid. But I like walking in the rain with my dogs. It's great because there's nobody about. You're drenched, and it's just lovely. So, no, I'm all right with water, mate. No problem.
Well, you can probably go and get yourself a glass of water or a cup of tea or something stronger now. Thanks so much for being such brilliant value, Brian. I hope it hasn't been. I hope it's been as enjoyable for you as it has for us taking a stroll down memory lane. So, until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. This has been the Claret Blue podcast with the legend that is Mr. Brian Little. Up the Villa.
Thank you for listening to Claret and Blue, an Aston Villa podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please do let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode, but until then, up the Villa.